Hi, folks. Matthew Johnson, a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm recording this video on UU theology for use in our Path to Membership class of the church and maybe for other congregations too. So if you're from another congregation, hello. I hope this is helpful to you. I'm going to keep this video brief. We're going to do Unitarian Universalist theology in 10 minutes or less. So let me explain who we are theologically. And it's helpful as we put those pieces together to think about where we came from. So I'm going to share my screen with you first to give a little bit of a presentation. So here we go. Share. Okay, so Unitarian Universalist theology, the 10-minute introduction. And we'll start with Unitarianism. What is Unitarianism? Well, it is the idea that there is one God, which is the Father. This is the original Unitarian belief. It dates back a couple hundred years to the late 1700s and early 1800s. Now, it goes back further. That's a whole nother story. But the early Unitarians in the United States believed that the God was one. And more importantly than that to them, although that's what the name means, their idea was that reason was a gift from God and should be used to understand Scripture, and that Jesus is not God, but a human being who teaches us how to live in accord with God's will, with the dictates of love and mercy and compassion. So this whole cluster of beliefs that they held was based in their reading of the Bible and their understanding of what it actually said, and their understanding that God was love and that Jesus was the exemplar of that love and taught us how to live, how to be in accord, and how to do justice and mercy in the world. And so they held this watchword that salvation is by character. So Catholics believe that salvation is by works, which is to say by doing the certain rituals, the rituals of confession and communion, baptism. These kinds of things keep you in right relationship with the holy. Protestants believe that salvation is by faith. Believing in God and Jesus keeps you in right relationship with God. Unitarians believe that salvation was by character, that by living well, one could be in right relationship with the holy. Now, Universalists emerge about the same time and about the same place, late 1700s, early 1800s. Actually, the Universalists are a little bit before in New England. Now, they also go way back into Europe, and that's a whole other story for another day. But their first belief is in universal salvation, that God's love is for everyone, God's love and mercy for everyone. And thus, eventually they come to the place that heaven and hell are qualities of life in this world, that all people should be reconciled. And that means that we ought to be reconciled to one another in this life as God is reconciled to us in the next. This, again, their original beliefs, which evolved generation after generation. That sin, then, is when you're out of harmony with God and with one another. And it's its own punishment. We are not separately punished for our sin, but when we're out of harmony, there's a deep wound in our soul. Now, both Unitarianism and Universalism are deeply affected by transcendentalism, the American literary and poetic movement. It's also a spiritual movement in the 1830s and 40s. And most of the transcendentalists were, in fact, Unitarians or Universalists, although some were only loosely related to their local Unitarian church, which they often found too traditional, even for them. So they talked about listening to the music of your divine soul, that each person had within them a spark of the divine, a holy power. These are folks like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Theodore Parker, Margaret Fuller, that you could connect directly to the divine through nature. So they loved to go out to Walden Pond or hike in the woods, through poetry and music and art. And also that out of that sense of that each person was holy and sacred and connected to the divine, there was an obligation to do justice in the world. And so they worked for the abolition of slavery, for equal rights for women, for mental health, and for other causes that were important to them, because each person was a child of the holy and could connect directly to that. And we are encouraged to listen to your own music, that it would sing in your own heart in another way. Now, 70 years or so go by, and in the early 1900s, so the first part of the 20th century, both Unitarianism and to a lesser extent Universalism are deeply affected by humanism. the idea that nothing human is alien to the religious. Now, humanism means lots of different things to lots of different people. It goes back to the Renaissance, and actually to the ancient Greeks and Romans before that, when people celebrated human possibility, creativity, intelligence, creation. And a great archetypal image of humanism is Michelangelo's David. Here's this beautiful body, right? Incarnate, the God and the Holy is incarnate in human beings. Well, these Unitarian and Universalist humanists said that we needed to have a religion with less supernaturalism and a devotion to good work, science, creativity, and reason. That outside their window were the tenement houses and the poverty that they were seeing in 1910, 1920, and there was a need for religion to do something about it. Right? So these are some of the roots. Where does that get us today? I say that we affirm the unity of reality and humanity. Right? So that unity is important to us. The world we live in is what matters. We're not worried about the next one. That's love. This one's got enough for us to handle. We affirm our humanist commitments to reason and science. Absolutely 100%. Reason and science continue to be important to us, and our transcendentalist heritage of spirituality and mysticism. There is more than what we always understand in words, for sure. And in line with our universalist philosophy and our pluralist embrace, we seek wisdom from the prophets and sages of all the world's religions and secular society. And I'll stop the screen sharing, chat with you a little bit more. What that means is that it moves us to the work of the world, right? To justice. Now, throughout our history of Unitarianism and Universalism, some Unitarians and Universalists have focused more on living your own life well, on reason and science and the own assurance of salvation that is offered to others, while other Unitarians and Universalists have been compelled by that idea that how we live is a reflection of the divine and that each person is holy and sacred and moved therefore to the work of justice. And really, since the beginning of both humanism and the social gospel and Unitarianism and Universalism in particular in the early part of the 20th century, we've been really committed to the work of justice as a way to live out our faith. Now, we don't always do it right. In recent years, we have grappled with the fact that theology has often been silent about white supremacy and other forms of oppression, and connecting the dots to say our belief that each person is sacred must be made manifest in the world that we live in. So this has always been an important part of Unitarianism. We say everyone's sacred, we look around at the world, and we see who isn't treated sacred, who isn't treated the way they should be treated. And then we have an obligation to do something about that. And that might be us, and it might be somebody other than us. I think what's happening now in our theology is we focus more on interdependence, how we're all connected to each other, and move away from the individualism that dominated some of our thinking in our early history. We see the way in which our fates are all bound up together, that all of us need all of us to survive, as the Reverend Teresa Soto has said, is becoming more and more an important part of theology. So challenging the way that white supremacy and other forms of oppression have twisted the theology of freedom and love and justice toward the maintenance of systems of oppression, and how if we really want to practice our theology of love and freedom and justice, then we must challenge systems of oppression in ourselves and wherever they might appear. That's hard work. Theology is hard work. So I want to talk about one other piece here of our theology, which is sacramental theology. The idea is that so a sacrament is a visible sign of the holy in the world. And if you grew up Catholic, you probably learned about 7 sacraments. It ranges from baptism to confession, communion, ordination, marriage, last rites, or a whole set of them. Lutherans have 4, Calvinists have 2, and Unitarians a long time ago, we went down to 0. There was a time when we really sort of removed and stripped away plain white walls in the sanctuary and got rid of it. But something very interesting happened when that happened. We went around the circle, which is to say that when you say that nothing in particular is a manifestation of the holy in the world, you have an opportunity to say that everything actually can be. If we open our hearts and our eyes and our ears, everything can be a manifestation of the holy in the world. Now, When I say holy or God or sacred love, these are metaphors, and we can't name what this is or contain it. And part of universalism and Unitarianism is to say that our words are insufficient for the mystery and the wonder of the universe, but that each of us is important and sacred and worthy, connected, a child of the universe, part of stardust, a child of God, whatever metaphor you use to describe that. Every person is, and every moment is. Every moment is a chance to connect with the sacred and the wonderful. So instead of zero sacraments, we come around to a deeply sacramental and immanent theology in which the holy is present wherever we are, whenever we are. And that moves us even more into the world of justice. For the work of justice is not something we do on the side, right? But the quality of human relations is how we show one another our love of neighbor and of self and of stranger. And that is what Unitarian Universalist theology calls us toward now. So you can put all these pieces together, right? The sacred is everywhere and in everyone. And that means it's in the places that are forgotten and ignored. It's in the person who has hurt you. And it doesn't mean you don't have boundaries or self-regard or safety, but it means that they're sacred too. That's really hard. It also means nature is sacred, both what's beautiful and what looks ugly on the surface, but is actually still sacred. And it also means that you are sacred. That's right. You. You are sacred and important and worthy and holy. And don't you forget it. That's Unitarian Universalist theology in a nutshell. There's so much more to say about this, lots of book recommendations, and we could go on and on and on. But here's a quick little introduction, and I welcome you to your theological journey of continuing to understand what that theology means for you and how you want to express that in your